Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. Well, after the Wuhan pandemic shuttered hundreds of thousands of small businesses, killed a few hundreds of thousands of Americans, and caused millions to lose their jobs, the Biden administration decided to make it all worse by attempting to extend the lockdown and upping the fear at every turn. And so, after we locked ourselves down and caused an unnecessary massive recession, unlike Florida and Texas, whose economies kept steaming along even with the pandemic, the Biden administration is now thinking really hard about how to help us all once again. And this time, the Biden administration wants to help the rural and disadvantaged in America with this amazing plan that you see. Now, I can't be sure, but I imagine that they had some kind of brainstorm at the White House in between the president's naps. I picture the president at the whiteboard in the Situation Room furiously writing down ideas from his crack cabinet team, and I don't mean that like it's Hunter Biden's. People who wake up every day thinking about how they can help the average American. People are just struggling to put food on the table and pay the bills. You know, the kind of people that Jen Psaki, Nancy Pelosi, and the president and Dr. Jill Biden hang around with. Salt of the earth types who live out in rural places. Now, the president and the first lady care about these people and have their best interests at heart. After all, Joe Biden is from Scranton, remember? He only told you 11 trillion times. He's a working class guy, like you, except he owns multiple homes and has a net worth of nearly $10 million, even though his average salary was $200,000, and he's able to fund like all kinds of fancy prostitutes for his son out of a place called Emerald Ladies. Turns out being a servant of the people can make you pretty rich. So back to the imaginary brainstorm led by President Biden about how to help the working class folks like Joe and Jill. Like any good brainstorm, I'm sure that there were a lot of worthy ideas thrown around. Stuff like dealing with the high cost of gas, with prices rising by 35% thanks to the Biden administration, doing things like shutting down Keystone XL and maybe stopping any of the drilling or access of even thinking about doing it on public lands, and then try to get those prices under control. No, not going to happen. And then the Colonial Pipeline reaction, that was a whole other matter. No, it was a good thought starter, though, yeah. But what else do we have? So here's another crazy notion that may have been thrown out. Maybe we shouldn't defund the police, since it's getting a lot of disadvantaged people everywhere, including people in the Black community, killed. There has to be a better idea than that to help the poor, right? They all must have thought this, because by now Biden was, who knows, he was tired. He's up there at the whiteboard. It's no exciting thinking coming from the crack cabinet. And that's when it happened. A bolt of lightning straight out of the blue. It struck Jen Psaki. We can't be sure if it was Psaki that actually had the idea, but she was very, very passionate about this new idea of how to help poor and rural folks. Here it is. Watch.
People across the country and people who care deeply about addressing our climate crisis know the components of what's in this package, which the president considers a down payment, not the end, a down payment. So 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations nationwide. That's what this would help support, with a focus on our highways and rural and disadvantaged communities.
So there it is, the idea of all ideas to help the rural and disadvantaged in America that emerged from the Biden administration brainstorm. It's to get them more electric charging stations, 500,000 of them. Why didn't we think of that? I mean, maybe sometimes the best ideas are hiding just in plain sight. Imagine how helpful those new electric car charging stations are going to be to disadvantaged rural folk. Now they can roll out of bed in the morning and head on over to the store and pay a ton more for things like lumber, gas, and milk and meat. And on the way, they'll get a beautiful view of one of those new 500,000 electric chargers that they will never use from the Biden administration. Because there's one small problem with this plan. So-called disadvantaged folks from rural areas don't drive electric cars. And by the way, if you can buy an electric car, you're not disadvantaged. They're expensive. Here's some statistics, though, about who does. A 2017 CarMax Clean Technia survey clarifies the demo for the average EV, electric vehicle owner. 65% are over 40, over 70% are college educated, and almost 70% makes over $75,000 per year. One other interesting stat appears when EV owners are asked about how they travel when they plan to go beyond the range of their vehicle's batteries. 40% noted that they, quote unquote, use a second car. Ostensibly, their second vehicle is a fossil-fueled vehicle and therefore not similarly range limited, even though a lot of the electric cars are also fossil-fueled vehicles. I know, because that's where the electricity comes from, the coal plants. So most of these upper middle class electric car owners, they also own a gas powered car, just in case they need to, I don't know, go places. A 2017 study by TrueCar.com confirmed these demos, reporting that the average Ford Focus electric owner was 43 and had an annual household income of $199,000. Fiat 500e owners had an average age of 45 and a household income of $145,000. John Krafkick, the president of TrueCar.com, noted that, quote, these are really affluent folks, end quote. Now, it's very obvious to any person who's actually living in a rural area, like many of my family, and is so-called disadvantaged, that these 500,000 new charging stations aren't actually for them. How do these rural folks know that? Well, they can walk out to their driveway or street where their car's parked, and they notice something. Looky here, my car ain't electric, which means this program isn't for disadvantaged or rural people at all. Imagine pulling up to the Buc-ee's and then charging your car so then you can go over to Ralph's and see what they got on sale. Maybe go to Buckeyes after. Everything's like buck something, by the way. I come from Southern Missouri. Everything's Buc-ee's or Buckeyes, buck something. This is part of the Biden administration's green agenda. I'm not even joking. And it's very much their agenda, not your agenda. It's the agenda you have when you're the party of the rich. And for the rich, 500,000 new charging stations paid for the American tax dollars. It has nothing to do with helping you. Just like defunding the police doesn't help you. You know what? People in like rural and like disadvantaged communities, they don't need 500,000 electric charging stations. They need, I don't know, maybe ideas for how they can keep their farmland and how they can keep a roof over their head and make sure that manufacturing jobs aren't offshored and make sure that they don't die. I don't know if they're in urban areas like the neighborhood I lived in St. Louis, that they aren't shot to death by policies that have been coming from this whole defund the police aesthetic. You know, unless you're making the charging stations bulletproof. Killing the Keystone Pipeline doesn't help you. Or sending your sons and daughters, which by and large majority come from rural America, off to die in Afghanistan. That doesn't help you either. Or how about leaving the border wide open to those who are entering the country illegally so they could stream into America and cause what? Isn't that what Democrats always say, by the way? Isn't that what Joe Biden always said? That we need people to come into the country to do jobs that you won't do. And I'm assuming by you, he was talking to Democrats. Anyway. Or they always say to take jobs away from rural Americans that the president claims to care about. I don't know. No, open borders don't help you. The crime that you see from cartels and 50 cal fire exchange at the border, that doesn't help you. And we know that Vice President, Madam Vice President, the border czar, she went to El Paso where the border wall already exists and it keeps out illegal entry and also mass quantities of drugs from coming across the border. Border walls work. That's why that was the only part of the border that she actually wanted to visit. See, it helps Democrats and their agenda as always, which brings us to a larger point. And that point is, if you haven't figured it out yet, the Biden administration doesn't really care what rural and disadvantaged people need because they don't know any, nor do they want to know them. I mean, frankly, it's clear that they loathe them. Remember the whole rural disadvantage? Those are the bitter clingers. According to Obama, remember Obama, Biden, people who cling to their guns and religion? They are the bad apples in that quote-unquote basket of deplorables Hillary Clinton told us about during her speech at that super swanky New York fundraiser. They're the Neanderthals, like Biden said, about the folks living down in Texas who don't want to live in a forever lockdown like elitists in blue states do, who can afford to sit at home apparently during lockdown and have their fancy stuff delivered to them by Amazon. And if these elites feel like taking a nice little vacation in their fancy electric car, these new 500,000 charging stations in rural disadvantaged areas, I'm sure those will come in quite handy, thank you. And that brings me to the second point. Democrats can never just tell the truth about what is on their agenda. What do they got in store? And the reason why? Typical Americans don't want what they're selling. Their new Green Deal, which is being shoehorned into the infrastructure package, is not popular, except with rich Democrats who don't know what infrastructure means. You know, the people who spew more carbon out of the back of their private jet in one trip than a town full of small, rural, disadvantaged people emit in a full year. But see, Democrats are no longer the party of the working class. They are the party of Wall Street, Big Pharma, Hollywood, Silicon Valley. They are the party of the global elites. And their agenda has nothing to do with your agenda at all. They intend on keeping and growing their wealth as they force these changes to the economy in the name of saving the earth, because the only way we can stop the sun from overheating the planet is to give it our money. And they plan on having you pay the price. How? by mandating 500,000 new electric charging stations, for example, that's going to get all their power from coal-fired plants, while doing everything they can to jack up the price of fossil fuels. It's no skin off their back. I mean, these rich rural folks running the Democrat Party, they got all the money in the world to pay an extra $30,000 for an electric car or double for a gallon of gas. So who cares? And if this new cost imposed on you in the name of their green agenda, if it causes you not to drive much at all, good, because that's great for their green agenda. Fewer carbon emissions. And that's why I always think that these people, they can't ever be forthright about their agenda because they know immediately it would be rejected. It's unpopular. It's not going to sell. But when you are a committed Marxist and you're trying to bring heaven down to earth, you may have to break a few eggs to make that omelet, as the communists would say. And namely, you have to break the backs of the rural poor in America to save the planet. And maybe that's why rural working class people defected en masse from the Democrat Party in 2016 and 2020. You know, the people that were good enough to vote for Bill Clinton all that time, the people who were good enough to kind of, accept Hillary Clinton when she ran on her husband's coattails, people who were good enough to vote for Barack Obama, but then when Hillary Clinton came up to run for president and these good people who had been such stalwart voters for the Democrat Party for so long decided to turn tail and vote for Trump and Republicans in 2016 and 2020, suddenly they were racist to the Democrat Party that apparently up until that exact moment had no problem with said racist voting for them. Yeah. It seems these disadvantaged, bitter clinger Neanderthals are smart enough to know when they're being conned. And if you think America needs 500,000 electric charging stations in rural America because of global warming or something, just make your case. Don't lie. Make your argument and let the American people decide whether or not they agree. But that's asking too much from a party that thinks it's smarter than you. And they know what's best for you, not you. So they lie. And that's how elites think, that you're not smart enough to agree with their genius, so they tell more absurd, noble lies every day. That is who this party is, folks. And they're now the party of lying Marxist elites. And most definitely not the party of rural, disadvantaged people who don't want or need electric car charging stations. I had someone actually tell me on Twitter, what about electric tractors? Do you know those? I'm like, have you ever met a literal farmer? It felt like an episode of Arrested Development where you had Michael trying to explain what a chicken looked like to Lindsay. Okay, have you ever met a farmer? And by the way, even there are some electric tractors out there, sure. Are they seriously going to drive all the way to a charging station at a gas station, which if you have ever been to rural America, you know are right not next to the people's houses? They're going to drive their tractor over there to charge it? Shut up. Up next, Democrats are after your money again. Surprise! Congressman Mike Kelly of Pennsylvania joins us to talk about how they plan to introduce a second death tax. Keep it here. Congressman Mike Kelly is going hard after Democrats for supercharging the death tax. He had a meeting on it this morning, and he's here to talk about the plans, Democrats' plans rather, to reach into your pocket even after you've been buried. Welcome, Congressman Kelly. It's good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Dana. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Of course. I'm very curious as to what you learned from the party across the aisle from you in your meeting today. Did you walk away hopeful at all? Does it look like they're going to walk this back? I mean, because it seems kind of a crazy plan considering that, I mean, it penalizes families and the people who have to bear the cost. I mean, quite a lot, but it never historically has really generated a lot of revenue. So why would they do this?
Because they have no other ways of finding revenue. You can't spend the way we're spending and then think that, wait, there's got to be somewhere we can go to go after things. So I've always thought it was kind of unusual. I'm also a small business person. I actually grew up, we had a farm. That's not the way we made our living. We made our living in the automobile business. But the whole focus on today was, so when you look at what's taking place, so people pay taxes their whole life, right? Then you die. So you get taxed. But the idea is there's just never enough. And so I think if you're to ask our friends on the other side, how much is enough, they'd say just a little bit more. In this case, it's not just a little bit more, it's a lot more. And so where do you find it? Any place we can. And if it's somebody who's worked all their life and saved and scrimped and really looked at it and saying, you know what? It's not about me, but it is about my kids, and it's about that next generation. So I want to build something that I can pass on to them on my death, that they can go ahead with their lives and be successful, build it even bigger so that, again, can get transferred. But there's just, for whatever reason, and believe me, I have no idea why it's just like this. I think most of the people that are facing this are blue-collar people who started small and worked and reinvested and followed the guidelines that most people who understand that at some point in your life, you have to pay for what you're using. But we're turning the tables on them and saying, listen, we're really glad you did that, because now we'll dip in and we'll make sure that even after your death, we're still able to somehow extract some type of a revenue, because quite frankly, we can't afford what we're doing, but you can. And I think the misconception in this country is somehow that the government is paying for all these things. And Dana, I know you've been working on this for years, and when I talk to people, I understand. Just please understand, the government pays for absolutely nothing. Hard-working American taxpayers do. In this case, you can't even die. So these are the two things in life are that you can't get away from, are death and taxes. In this case, footnote that even after death, we're still going to come after you. So yeah, you can't get away from death. You're never going to get away from taxes, even upon your death. So, and the people who survive, your heirs, are going to get hit, and they're going to maybe have to sell whatever it is that you were able to leave to them in order to pay the taxes on this asset that really belong to the government and not to you. It's absolutely upside down thinking.
It's incredibly sad. It's incredibly punitive as well. And I love the point that you made that this really affects a lot of blue collar folks, because the majority, there was not too long ago, maybe a couple of years ago, there were some pieces in Wall Street Journal, Forbes as well, that said this idea of nouveau riche, of old money in the United States, is kind of a fairy tale. I mean, there are a few families like maybe the Waltons that have generational, quote unquote, generational wealth, but by and large, it's people who, especially in the startup and tech startup, that are creating their fortunes, creating these empires for them, and being able to pass that off to their families. It's all new money. So it's really punishing the American dream. It's punishing people for achieving it.
Yeah, sure. Well, all the tech oligarchs, and of course, when you put people in these categories. By the way, so we talk about Mr. Walton. Mr. Walton started with absolutely nothing and built it into something that is just incredible. One of the biggest retailers I think we ever could imagine. But again, could he do that in today? What could he be able to do? How would he pass on to his heirs? And you talk to any of the people that have accumulated some type of wealth, and of course, there's a certain percentage of people that were born into wealth. But the biggest wealth you can be born into is being born in the United States of America. Every American is born with a silver spoon in his or her mouth, because of who we are, what we are, and the nation and what it stands for. And that it doesn't matter where you start, everybody's going to have the equal opportunity. Maybe not the equal outcome, but the equal opportunity. So how do you tell people that work hard all their life that even upon your death, what you think you've done for your heirs, we're going to dip into that and we're going to destroy that. At some point, you just get to the point, you know what? I'm out of here. I'm out of here. And that's the dangerous part right now. I just think that we are destroying the American dream because of the American nightmare. And that is an administration that just cannot stop spending money. And honestly, Dana, if you and I were to look at the money supply right now, the M1, the growth in our money supply, if we were to look at that, we would swear to God that in the last 5 months, somebody was counterfeiting at such a rate and pushing it into our monetary system that it's really dangerous. And that's the reason we don't want people counterfeiting money. But we find out, no, you don't understand. It's your own treasury that's doing it. We have reduced the value of our money to a point. So when people talk about inflation, I said there's also another problem. The value of your dollar has gone down. So it comes fast forward then to what about those that work a lifetime with the idea that somehow they were being able to pass on to somebody else, their heirs, this wonderful, wonderful business model that they produce, whether it's a farm, whether it's a small business. Why would you take that incentive away from anybody? At what point do people then get excited about, you know what, I'm going to make it better for my kids. I'm going to make it better for not just my kids, but my grandkids and maybe my great-grandkids, because I'm an American and I have the opportunity to do that. The outcome is different for everybody. I understand that. But the opportunity to do it, there's no other place in the world that you can do this. Why would we take that incentive away from folks?
Exactly. No, and that's, it always mystified me as to why there was a party that would look to punish and penalize, all of this new creation. And doesn't that, by the way, I mean, how are Democrat voters? I can imagine Democrat voters, talking with Congressman Mike Kelly here from Pennsylvania, I can imagine that the base for the Biden administration is happy about this at all. So far, they haven't produced anything. The administration, everything that they've tried to do, particularly foreign policy, has been an absolute mess. So this surely can't help anything. They've been walking everything back from defunding the police to now CRT. Is this next?
Yeah, of course. Of course. Well, look, this is irresponsible what we've done, especially the last 5 months. I've always thought that debt is something that you always want to work to bring down. I don't know if any of us go into any day thinking, I'm going to see how much more money I can spend today that I have to borrow in order to be able to purchase it. And you say, no, that's not the way we do it. But I told you I was in the automobile business. So one of the biggest problems that I think in the automobile business is looked at is at the end of time when you want to trade in your current mode of transportation, you want to be in a positive position and not be what we consider to be upside down. And what does that mean? You owe more on the car than it's worth. So we've always told people, pay down your debt. Pay down your debt. That's the best way to go about life. Then you won't have the same worries that you would have when you owe way too much money and have no way of paying for it. And I think that right now we look at an administration that has a complete disregard for the fundamentals of what a strong economy is. It's not about how many times did your mom and dad or your grandma and grandpa tell you it's not what you make, it's what you save. That was always the thing that I grew up with. And it was always make sure, every time we look at the statement at the business, my dad would always go say, how much cash do you have on hand? How much cash do you have outside of the business? Because when times get tough, you're going to have to go to that reserve in order to stay alive. And that's where
we have an economic illiteracy in this country too, Congressman, don't you think so? Massive economic illiteracy. I wish that was actually taught more in the K through 12 level.
Well, look, I mean, what you just hit on. So what is a lot of the problems that we look at? Number one, public education. So, one thing, and I will say this, of all the things that the pandemic brought about, the one thing it brought about is that the public schools came into our homes. Parents got to see firsthand what their children were being taught. And as they sat and watched with their children while they were going through different lessons, they said, who came up with this critical race theory? What does this mean? They never had heard it before. I sat in a school board for 4 years. 3 things that came up every school board meeting, Dana. Number one, coaches. Got terrible coaches. My son's going to be an All-American. The stupid coach thinks he's a lineman. He's really a quarterback. Number two, the bus doesn't stop at the end of our sidewalk. Doggone it, my brother-in-law, they pick their kids up right there. And then number three, my taxes are too high. Nobody ever said to me, what am I paying for? I know I have taxes that I'm willing to pay to educate our children, but what is it buying us? And what we're finding out now is for almost 70 years, we turned education over in the 50s to a group that had no respect for what it cost to get to where we were. And that is the greatest nation the world has ever known. And we did it. So how? We educated our people early on in Pennsylvania. The Public School Act of 1849 is where the people came together and said, the most important thing we have, the most important asset we have are our kids. They will be the ones that will determine how far this country goes going into the future. Education is the way to get there. We know that. But we turned that education over to a different group. They don't see things the way we see things, and we need to take control of that.
And hopefully, too, we can also talk about what we're paying for and maybe reducing some of the cost for public school, particularly after so many parents have been pulling their kids out, sending them to alternative forms of learning. One last quick question for you, Congressman.
Yes, ma'am.
As we are rolling into this, everybody's been talking about the infrastructure, reconciliation. We've been focusing on having this conversation about Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, both trying to be bad cop. That scenario's never worked. Do you think that this infrastructure package, this request from Biden, do you think that this bill is going to pass? Do you think that reconciliation are they going to get everything that they want, essentially, Democrats, with this? Your thoughts?
No, they're not going to get everything they want. That I would just say that right now, when you look at this, of course, I wasn't here in 1974 when the idea of coming up with the reconciliation came into effect. At some point, I guess the senators decided, look, we're going to have a simple majority somewhere along the line here. But let's do it when it comes to spending and revenue raising and things of that nature. But you can only do it once. Look, I think there's enough division within the Democrat Party right now. And I think that if a lot of the people that I serve with come from districts like my district, they got elected. They are conservative in their nature. They're just not allowed to be conservative publicly. I think a lot of them right now will push back on this. And I think if we look to the Senate, I think there's going to be a harder sale there. I would hope I would hope that the people that watch your show, and thank you for what you've been doing, because we've got to get the message out. We've got to get people educated. I just tell people all the time, never take for granted that the United States is always going to be rock solid and is going to be the greatest nation in the world.
Right.
When we turn our government over to irresponsible people, you can't be surprised by what you end up with. And I am a very big advocate for this, and I hope my friends that I serve with that have never been in the private sector, one of the things you need to do in your lifetime is got to the point at least once in your life where you thought you were going broke. And number two, get paid on commission only, not just get paid for showing up. Get paid for what you produce. And I firmly believe that. That's not being mean or nasty. Whenever you find out that you're vulnerable, then you start to think to yourself, you know what do I have to do? Make yourself less vulnerable. How do you do that? Taking the gifts that God gave you and making yourself a better person and making yourself relevant, for crying out loud.
Yeah, and learning value. There's skills you can learn in the private sector that you can't learn elsewhere. Congressman Mike Kelly, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate talking with you, and we hope to see you again. Best of luck fighting for it in Congress. We appreciate it.
Hey, listen, we can't forfeit the game and then cry because we lost. We're playing it the whole way through. So thanks for what you're doing.
That's right.
You've always been a champion.
That's right.
You've always been a champion.
Thank you, Congressman. Appreciate you. Thank you. Up next, Cynthia Monteleone, a world champion track athlete, 400 meters, which is like one of the hardest. 400 meters is torture to a distance runner like myself. She's going to join us next to talk about the latest threat to women's sports. It's the erasure of women competing against biological males who've gone through puberty as males, got the muscle mass, the bone density. She's next. Stay with us. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company serving premium coffee to people who love America. Veteran CEO and founder Evan Hafer spent over 7 years on the grounds with U.S. Special Forces and as a CIA contractor. So Black Rifle Coffee, they're committed to Evan's mission of supporting veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. So this summer, Black Rifle Coffee Company invites you to enjoy your coffee. I take mine black like my soul, black and bitter. Whether you're brewing the perfect cup of pour over or cracking a can of 300 open on your next backcountry mission, Black Rifle Coffee is here to fuel your way wherever that summer takes you. So head on over to blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV to order yours and use code DanaTV at checkout for 20% off your purchase and your first coffee club order. Fuel your summer with America's coffee. Black Rifle Coffee. Well, after fighting for decades for the right to play sports, women are now having to fight for that right apparently all over again. The threat this time comes from this movement. It's the men identifying as women, women identifying as men, but really it's the men identifying as women, the trans movement that's intending on forcing everyone to bend the knee, and really it's quite patriarchal. This is an unbelievable story. Cynthia Monteleone is a world champion track star, 400 meters, which is the hardest race that has ever been just imagined by humans. It is the most torturous race ever, and she's a champion at it. She's leading the fight to preserve women's sports. Cynthia, I have to say, first, welcome. Number two, your background, where you actually live, is I have never been more jealous of another human in my life. But welcome, it's good to see you.
Aloha and mahalo. Yes, I'm definitely privileged and happy to live here and enjoy paradise. So mahalo for having me and allowing me to use my voice to speak up for my fellow women.
Yes, and I'm so glad that you are, because, and especially with something, with track, we've been having this conversation about, for instance, weightlifting and New Zealand having this individual who identifies as a male competing. I mean, you've been through this. You and your daughter have been through this issue, and I want you to tell a little bit to those watching, tell a little bit about your story, because there is a real concern that women could be erased from sports. I mean, how do you compete against people who have gone through puberty as men and developed the muscle mass and bone density as men, who just, many of them recently decide to identify as women? How can women compete in something like that?
Right, and the bottom line is that we can't compete with that. When comparably gifted and trained, and even after hormone treatment and gender reassignment surgery, the male-bodied athlete will still have an advantage over female-bodied athletes. And their other opposing side will say, oh no, hormones make all the difference. But we're not just hormones. Like you said, we are muscle mass, bone density, and even before puberty, things like satellite cells that dictate how many muscle fibers are able to grow, that happens in the womb. So these changes are there early on, and I think a lot of people don't realize that. And so when I was competing at the World Championships in Malaga, Spain in 2018, I raced against a biological male identifying as a female, and I started to raise questions as to the fairness of this. And I was quickly told that for my own safety, perhaps I should be quiet about this and keep my mouth shut. But of course, I will not be silenced, and I will keep speaking up for not only myself and my daughter, but for everyone's daughter, for your daughter, for my neighbor's daughter, for nieces, for sisters, for everyone. And this is a really important issue, especially to me coming from Maui, because the founder of Title IX, Patsy Mink, was from Maui. And she said once that she felt like she had the burden to speak for all women across the country. And I'm feeling that, that same thing. I relate to that.
Yeah, very much so. The similarities there are pretty amazing. And we're talking with Cynthia, who, I mean, she's competed against biological males. Your daughter's competed against biological males. For a lot of females, this is their chance to, get that scholarship, go to the Olympics. And I keep thinking of the weightlifting, for instance. There was a woman who was knocked out of contention and knocked out of being placed on the Olympic team for New Zealand because this man who competed as a man and then only recently began competing as a female decided to compete and qualify and take her spot. What does the future of sports look like? Let's just, say that all of this does come to pass and this becomes the new standard. When you have a single-sex sport, all sports being single-sex, what does the future of sports look like?
Well, it just means that women will not have these opportunities anymore because they'll be taken by the biological males identifying as women. It really is not dramatic to say it's the end of female sports, because that's exactly what it is. These college coaches are then going to start recruiting whoever is the best athlete that's going to win them the championships. And the more this keeps happening, the more it's going to be the biological males, because they will always, again, have the advantage against a comparably gifted and trained female. And so this really means that, especially with the recent NCAA ruling saying that now NCAA has to compensate their athletes, even more is at stake for women in losing these opportunities. So it really is the end of female sports. And common sense and biology tells us that, we will always be at a disadvantage. We will never be able to compete with the biology of a male athlete.
Oh, so incredibly sad.
And if you say male, and if you say anything else besides, that, then you're labeled. And label me whatever you'd like. I'm still going to speak up. It doesn't bother me. Champions really don't place value in the opinions of others. We just stand up for what's right, and we keep fighting for what's right. And I hope to encourage your listeners to do the same.
I love that you said it like that, because that's absolutely true. Champions do not care about that sort of, they don't care about those critics. I wanted to go back to something that you said that really troubled me when you were talking about how when you had competed and against a biological male and you were bringing up concerns about this, you were told for your own safety to not say anything. For your own safety, an athlete that's questioning the fairness of competition, that seems like an insane thing to have anyone to have said that to. And especially in 2018, why were you told that? What did they think was going to happen?
Well, I would like to think that someone was actually truly concerned about my safety. And why would my safety be compromised for asking these very simple and valid questions? I don't know. But, I found discouragement from the very beginning. When I would bring up these issues, no one wanted to talk about it. They thought it was a taboo issue. I'm still told by certain people like, oh, it's a touchy subject, or, it's a sensitive subject, but it really shouldn't be. And it shouldn't be a political subject. It shouldn't be a partisan subject. It shouldn't be touchy. We need to be talking about this because it's happening to myself, happened to my daughter, a mother and a daughter. And what I'm telling you is it's happening a lot more than you think. Just because the mainstream media is not reporting doesn't mean it's not happening. In fact, some outlets refused our story and then came out and said that this is not happening. So not only are they censoring stories like ours, but then they're reporting that it's not happening. So let's just face the truth that it is happening and we need to talk about it. So I encourage everyone else to also, to keep talking about it.
I watched an interview with your daughter, and she was so sweet. And she was, she was just talking about having to compete against a biological male. As a mother, when you see your daughter going through that struggle, because parents always look at their children and think, I want to go through this and push back against this, so you don't have to deal with it. What were your thoughts? And did that discourage your daughter from continuing to compete? Tell me about that and her reaction.
Right. Well, my daughter is very brave. I'm so proud of her for choosing to also speak up about this. She worked so hard. She had trained all year for her very first high school race, and she came in second to a biological male identifying as a female who had only practiced track for 2 weeks. They had previously been on the male volleyball team, had transferred to the female volleyball team that year before track season. So she already knew that this individual was very powerful, and she was already feeling discouraged as she lined up, but she still did her best. She came in second, but a lot of her teammates were literally crying on the field. It was their senior year, and they said to me things like, and said to her, like, why should I even do track anymore? Because I'm not going to win the conference championship. All of my hard work is not going to pay off. So this lesson that I'm trying to teach my girls as a coach, hard work pays off. It falls apart when literally a mediocre male can show up and take an opportunity away from a female. And just because it was just a small town race, one heat of a 400 meters, it doesn't mean that it's not important to girls like my daughter. It's heartbreaking and disappointing.
Yeah, that's right. And especially 400. 400's it's a very short race. It's one of the I did 1600 and 3200. So I have just tons of respect for 400 meter athletes, because that's I think it's one of the most mentally challenging races that you can do. And you're already dealing with that. And so then you line up on the starting line, and you know that you're going to go up against a biological male. Kudos to your daughter as well. Of course, she's a very strong mother from weathering that. Last question for you, and we're talking with Cynthia Monteleone, who world champion track athlete. She's been speaking out against the erasure of women in sports. What can parents do? What can students do? I know a lot of students are afraid to speak out because they don't want to be targeted for kind of going against the grain, so to speak. So obviously that kind of even places, I think, even more responsibility on the parents. So what can parents do to be active, to kind of shield their children from that kind of criticism, and yet still advocate for them and against this erasure of women in sports?
Right. Well, there is a certain type of unshaken confidence that comes with knowing who you are and knowing that you're speaking the truth. So really reiterate that point, I would say, with your kids. Always have them come from a place of compassion. I have compassion for all athletes involved, and I would like to see the day where trans athletes can compete in maybe a category where they're not feeling all of this pressure from everyone else, because we should have compassion for everyone. So come from a place of compassion and speak the truth, because the truth will prevail. And don't let anyone tell you that you can't file a complaint. I filed a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights. I was told I could not file a complaint, but I still filed one. So don't be afraid to file complaints, and speak up and tell your story, and just really fight for what's right. I encourage that. There's a petition at IWF.org, the group that did a video about us, that they can also sign.
Yes, IWF.org, Independent Women's Forum. Cynthia Monteleone, appreciate you speaking out, and also kind of inspiring all these other female athletes that are looking around thinking, okay, what's next? What am I going to do? Giving them that encouragement, because I know a lot out there need it. So thank you so much. Good to see you.
Mahalo. Thank you for having me. Aloha.
Of course. All right, folks, coming up, did you know, apparently, according to the NFL, football's gay? According to the NFL, it is anyway. Keep it here. We'll tell you all about it next. The NFL has a brand new announcement that's sure to get you pumped up for preseason. Football is gay. That's right. It's super gay and trans and everything LGBTQ. In fact, here's the new ad promoting the NFL's newfound gayness. Watch. The hoots and hollers were pretty funny. How did the NFL just figure this out? I mean, the rest of us were sitting here thinking, tell us something that we don't know. I mean, all these sweaty, buff dudes running around in skin-tight pants, crowding together in huddles and butt-slapping each other every time after every touchdown. It was obvious to everybody except Roger Goodell, apparently. I'm kidding, of course. No, I'm not. Or am I? NFL football might be the least gay thing on God's green earth. Really, though, I mean, you have the one guy, what's his face, the center? I just learned this today. I know as much about football as Joe Biden knows about guns. And the guy who like squats down with his hands below his giblets, I don't even know who that is, the center apparently. So have me do a football game. Have me commentate over a football game, right? Anyway, who cares about the truth? The rainbow revolution must proceed, and the NFL wants to be on the right side of history after all. So finally, the NFL's coming out of the closet, and not a moment too soon, because it's Pride Month, right? It's the month where companies and brands wrap each other in rainbows and trip over each other to show their rainbow spirit for all to see. They're so excited. The NFL can't afford to be left out of this contest for who's the most gay brand in America. Otherwise, they may have some left-wing activists come after them. And those activists know that the NFL will do whatever activists tell them to do, just as Colin Kaepernick. So the NFL wants you to know that they're gay. It's about as true as Broadway saying that they're super straight. And it's just a hunch, but I'm not sure gay people except one gay friend that I know who actually cares a little bit about NFL. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm just, just thinking that it's not in general the LGBTQ community. They're not strapping on their cheese heads or donning their Raider gear, right, every Sunday morning. But for the NFL, this isn't about talking to your target market. This is about virtue signaling that you're down with the LGBTQ movement, even if that movement really could not care less about the NFL, other than to see the NFL bow down to it. So now you're probably doing some thinking. Didn't one NFL player, I don't even know what this dude's name is, come out of the closet recently? Yes, and I can't even tell you what position he plays. His name's Carl Nassib. Here is the video that he put out last week.
What's up, people? I'm Carl Nassib. I'm at my house here in Westchester, Pennsylvania. Just want to take a quick moment to say that I'm gay. I've been meaning to do this for a while now, but I finally feel comfortable enough to get it off my chest. I really have the best life. I got the best family, friends, and job a guy could ask for. I'm a pretty private person, so I hope you guys know that I'm really not doing this for attention. I just think that representation and visibility are so important. I actually hope that one day videos like this and the whole coming out process are just not necessary.
Oh my
but
gosh,
until
they're
then,
not
I'm going to do my
now.
best and do my part to cultivate a culture that's accepting, that's compassionate, and I'm going to start by donating $100,000 to the Trevor Project.
Guess what? Those videos aren't necessary now. That's what's crazy. Nassib. I still can't tell you what he does. Can you throw a football? Can you catch it? Nobody cares. Here's the weird thing. Straight, hetero NFL fans, everybody yawned. And I actually went, he plays football when I first saw this. Remember Michael Sam, the NFL player who came out years ago? Because we were all bored to death of that too. That's because NFL fans only care about one thing, that you can bring it on the gridiron. That's what you do off the gridiron, that's your business. Nobody cares. But that didn't stop Commissioner Roger Goodell from demonstrating his LGBTQ virtue. He said this of NFL player Carl Nassib's announcement that everyone stop the presses, he's gay. Quote, the NFL family is proud of Carl for courageously sharing his truth today. Representation matters. We share his hope that someday soon statements like his will no longer be newsworthy as we march towards full equality for the LGBTQ community. We wish Carl the best of luck this coming season, end quote. It wasn't actually newsworthy, Roger. Fans don't care if Carl Nassib, I don't know what position he plays, is gay, or if the NFL is gay, or if you're gay, Roger, no one cares he's gay. You're gay. It's like Oprah, but with woke. They care if the NFL games and the players are great. And after that, they care that the players are decent examples for their kids and do the little things that you should do when you're paid trillions of dollars to run around on a field in order to move a leather bean downfield. And it really is a leather bean. I didn't know Naugahyde wasn't a thing until I was 15. It is Naugahyde, but it's not actually made from Naugas. So, little things like stand for the American flag, something Roger Goodell and the NFL just doesn't really seem to believe much in these days. But the NFL does want you to know that the league believes that it's super, super, super gay. And they believe that this matters a lot, even if it doesn't really matter to you. It doesn't matter to anybody. Just, can you throw the leather bean down the field? No one cares. That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.